let's try that again. Actions, student invite, Brandon. Hey, there he is. All right, let's see if we can get Brandon to come up on the screen here. Should have. All right, I heard you for a second there, Brandon. Let's see if we can. Hey, there you go. You're here. Hey, now I got to ask you a question. Where are you actually?
I'm at a brewery. I'm hanging out,
Awesome.
taking it easy. I figured we were just going to have a nice conversation. So if it's too loud, though, I can step outside. You let me know.
No. I can hear a little bit of the echo in the background, but that's about it. Do you have the what hockey game you got in the back there? You got the Maple Leafs?
Yeah, it's let's see, it's the Toronto and Tampa Bay, and then up there is the baseball game. So yeah, we're good.
Gotcha. Well, I see that. So I wish that I could catch the Bruins behind you because that's what I'm not seeing as we speak.
Sorry, they don't have that one on right now. So well,
that's okay.
It's all right. It's all right.
No, it is. It is. All right. So you're in. We can hear you. We're good. We could share screens when we need to. I've got the prompts up and whatnot.
Great.
I appreciate all there are English teachers here, and if you want, you can just toss in a quick little hello in the chat. Tell us where you're from. And as Brandon and I kind of talk about literature, feel free to chime in the chat and whatnot. If there are any questions that you have, that's fine. I will talk, a lot about how I would approach this with my kids or the types of things that I would expect from my students as we look through the prompts together here. We got Florida, New York, Indiana, Arkansas. This is awesome. Honduras.
Lawrenceburg, Indiana. That's right across the river from me. Good to see you there, Susan. I saw Honduras, too. Jessica from Hoptown. I know Hoptown really well. Yeah.
All right.
San Antonio.
All right. From Philly. Anybody up from Massachusetts? Anybody by me? Right.
Long Meadow. Somebody's from Long Meadow, Mass.
There we go. Long Meadow. Hey there, Chris. I hope you're well.
Yeah.
Hopefully someday we can meet up and hang out and all that other cool stuff.
Some of y'all are just now joining. We're just dropping in where you're at right now.
Yeah.
Great to see people joining us, having a conversation.
Yep. being nerds, which is just what it is. So it's super nice to see. I anticipate that some people will be coming in and out. That's okay. If you have any comments to make while we talk, by all means, feel free to drop them in. And I don't think there are many students in here, although we did extend the invite to students if they wanted to kind of hear English teachers kind of geek out about these kind of things. But if you're an adult and there's something that you really want to add, that's okay. We can invite you up here to say something too. But Brandon and I wanted to just talk about, looking at the prompt, looking at the readings, how we would approach the readings, and things like that. And it will go as long as it will go. And, we'll kind of leave it at that. So, Brandon,
I think it's really important to tell people too that like Tim and I sent Tim a text last week and said, hey, I think this would be a good idea. We talked for maybe 10 minutes today, but we don't have anything planned. Like we haven't gone into any kind of deep discussion and analysis. That might be disappointing to some of y'all, but I thought it would be great just to see how we digest what's there.
Yeah.
And get some feedback from you all too. So,
right. And on top of that, I did actually just plan one thing, Brandon. So I planned one thing on my own. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to get angry with me because I knew that we wanted to make this a little bit impromptu because that's what our kids experience, right? They get this poem, they get it, and they get this prose passage, and they get this question 3, and it's impromptu, and they have to kind of like work with it. And, they don't have days and days to think about it. So we want to try to make this as authentic as possible. So anyway, what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to share my screen just so people know if you have like a question or something that you really want to get our attention with, you can actually drop it in the Q&A tab. And that will kind of separate that out from the comments because, as discussions happen in the comments and whatnot, if there's something you want us to really address, please just drop it in the Q&A tab.
And that Q&A tab, everyone, if you're new to this platform, it's a different tab than the live chat. So you may you're going to want to look at that. Make sure that you're on the Q&A.
Yeah. When you drop that in there and you can upvote things, but because we're just talking, maybe that'll be a little bit different than when I do normal lives with a bunch of students and stuff in here. So anyway, we really appreciate you. I'm going to share up my screen, Brandon. I'm going to pull up these AP Lit prompts right now.
Go for it.
And we'll start with question 1. And I'll look at I'll read the prompt, Brandon. We'll talk about how you would approach that and like what you're thinking about, and then after I talk about the prompt a little bit, we can get into actually checking out the poem. Okay?
Sure.
All right. So, Brandon, do you want me to take care of reading the prompt here, or do you want to do it?
You said you were going to do it, so go for it.
All right, there we go. In Richard Blanco's poem, Shaving, published in 1998, the speaker writes about the act of shaving. Read the poem carefully, then in a well-written essay, analyze how Blanco uses literary elements and techniques to develop the speaker's complex associations with the rituals of shaving. All right, and the rest of the bullet points, of course, are the stuff for the rubric there. But Brandon, if you get this prompt, your kid or you're working with your kids on this, what are you trying to get them to do?
So, the first thing that I want them to recognize is what the complexity must be associated with. So is it the complexity of a character? Is it complexity of a speaker? Is it complexity of a perspective? In this case, it's complex associations with the ritual of shaving. And so I would really want students to think about what that term associations means. Now, they should know that. I mean, that associations is something that is rife throughout the course and exam description, representations, associations. So I'm really glad to see that the committee and College Board and ETS have stuck with that language. But I would really want students to think about what the speaker is associating with the ritual of shaving.
Gotcha.
Now, something I like to talk to people a lot about is, okay, where do you think this could go wrong? And so you may have already thought about that, Tim. I've got some ideas for that too, but I want to kick it over to you to see what you're thinking about this prompt the first time you read it.
Yeah. So one of the things that I actually really appreciate about the prompt, hold on one second, Brendan. I just want to address something in the chat. So something came up in the chat that said, I only see the chat. Is this like a live kind of Zoom-like thing? You should have a video image. I hope that most of you can see a video image. I've got the prompts up on the screen right now. And then Brandon and I are up in the corner. If that's not the case for most of you, please put that in the chat so we can try to figure that out. But there should be a video image there. But anyway, Brandon, back to your question, right? A couple of things that I really appreciate with the prompt, right, is that I know that the poem is called Shaving, but I appreciate that it actually says the speaker writes about the act of shaving. And the reason why is because a lot of times my kids always want to jump to the abstract first. And I always try to tell them, like, hold on, let's get to the concrete here. Let's understand and comprehend what's actually going on. And then we can move to these kind of abstract elements, which would be the complex associations with the ritual of shaving. And the other thing, too, that I would really instruct my kids to think about is I always have my kids turn the prompt into a question about what they can't know at the end of the piece. So it always starts with this to develop. So when I got this prompt, the very first thing that I did after I was like, okay, boom, we're talking about shaving, okay, is I say, good, what can't I know in what's highlighted here? And it's what is the speaker's complex associations with the ritual of shaving? So my kids are going to ask that question. It's going to be on the top of their paper. What is the complex association that the speaker has with the ritual of shaving? And that's what they have to read for. So whenever they read and they identify any association with the act of shaving, what's going to happen is they're going to make a note of that. And it's like, boom, there's a paragraph. So your topic sentence can say the speaker does whatever to convey this association with shaving. Oh, hey, this shift here conveys this association with shaving. And that helps them navigate through it a little bit. And so that's what I'm thinking about whenever I get to a prompt with something like this.
Yeah. So first, I went ahead and dropped the link to the PDF of the prompts in the chat. If anybody doesn't already have that, College Board released them on Friday, but I know some people haven't had the opportunity to get a hold of them. Or you can just look at what Tim is sharing on his screen. Tim, I like what you do about drawing that line between the abstract and the concrete, because kids often go there, especially the kids that are sometimes too smart for their own good.
Yeah, right.
They go there sooner than they should before they understand what's and what ends up, the effect of that cause is that they end up writing an essay that is about this big, broad, abstract philosophical concept, which might be cool, might be a really cool essay, but unless they ground it in what the text is saying, not doing what has to be done.
Right.
And I've read it. I know you have. We've talked about it. I've read essays like this, and they usually are by the kids too smart to have to really read and pay attention.
Yeah.
Times. Worry as much about those kids as I do the kids who struggle to read the passage in the first place.
Right.
Because especially when they see the word associations, they're immediately going to start thinking abstraction, right?
Right. Right. Yeah. And we have to really get them to recognize, what's going through the shaving process or the ritual of the shaving. And I actually appreciate that word ritual there too. It's something that happens consistently because all the images in the poem are dealing with some element of consistency in the process. Marcia just brought up the kids that think that they're smarter than the test. It happens all the time. We all have them. Sometimes I actually have kids that are smarter than the test, and I'm like, yep, you're going to go do your thing at Georgetown and own it, and I appreciate that. Or Harvard or Stanford or wherever else. But all right, so we've got our poem here, Brandon. So let's actually just go through and pull out some of these complex associations with this here.
Tim, I really think we should hear the poem aloud.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
These people didn't take their time necessarily to come and hear us read to them, but poetry's meant to be heard. Yeah. And I really think we should read it. So I can read it. You can read it. You read the prompt. I don't mind to read the poem.
All right. Well, that's fine. Why don't you read the poem here? And I'll just scan through. We're not going to read the prose passage. Now, I know I'm jumping the gun already, but just because of the length of it. But I do agree. I think the poem needs to be kind of looked at here. So, Brandon, it's all you.
All right. Thank you. I'm just replying to Marcia's chat here. All right. Shaving. I'm not shaving. I'm writing about it. And I conjure the most elaborate idea. Now my beard is a creation of silent labor, like ocean steam rising to form clouds or the blooms of spider webs each morning. The discreet mystery of how whiskers grow like the drink roses take from the vase or the fall of fresh rain, becoming a river and then again so silently. I think of all these slow and silent forces and how quietly my father's life passed us by. I think of those mornings when I am shaving and remember him in a masquerade of foam. Then, as if it was his beard, I took the blade to. The memory of him and tiny snips of black whiskers swirling in the drain, dead pieces of the self from the face that never taught me how to shave. His legacy of whiskers that grow like black seeds sown over my cheek and chin, my own flesh. I am not shaving, but I will tell you about the mornings with a full beard and the blade in my hand, when my eyes don't recognize themselves in a mirror echoed with 100 faces I have washed and shaved. It is in that split second when perhaps the roses drink and the clouds form, when perhaps the spider spins and the rain transforms, that I most understand the invisibility of life and the intensity of vanishing, like steam at the slick edges of the mirror, without a trace. Oof. So rich, so much there. So Tim, you did it to me thinking about your first reactions with the prompt. So what are your first reactions with the poem?
Right. So when I was in here and I was looking at this, right, when I was looking at the beginning of the poem, I always think about what are the associations? And so what I actually force my kids to do, and I'll show you because this is the first association, is I always tell my kids that they need to say suggesting that, right? So when you read any part of a poem, just say this part of the poem suggests blank in relation to answering that question. So what I did was I actually created a little separate part here. This is the part that I didn't tell you about, right? But this was the first thing. This is the first idea that I associated with it, was this idea that life's like silent intricacies are enigmatically tied to how life progresses. And I was just so moved by the consistent soft sound of the alliterative elements throughout here, and I was like, wow, that's really soft, kind of like, hey, this is happening and it's consistent and it just keeps marching forward. And then he ties that to his father's life that passes him by, and that was the first kind of moment that I was like, oh man, life works and it keeps going. And the part that stuck out to me the most was, because I read the whole poem, was when we have this existential crisis down at the bottom, and I'm like, oh man, like the images of the life continuing on is also that image that kind of gives him that that startle right here as he looks in the mirror, as he comes to term with that. So those are the kind of initial thoughts that I was having as I read through, like after I got to the end.
So I'm glad that you built the way you would. I'm glad that you shared what you shared. Seriously, and it's not because I didn't prepare anything. It's always nice to see how we begin to ask our students to think through some of these things. I really kind of took it in that middle space between what I would ask students to do and how I'm digesting it myself, because I knew our audience, of teachers tonight too would also want to, geek out a little bit with the poem on their own.
Right, and so, it's so gorgeous.
So, I mean, there are just so many things here. And somebody, I agree with Doris in the chat, Blanco is just amazing. And let's just give it up to College Board for making certain to have some, some diverse representation across the different prompts here too. But the thing that caught me the most in the poem, the thing that really just grabbed me was, and I had, at line 13, at the end of that line, I have that then. And it's like, to me, like it was between that and line 17, where we see this discussion about the father that, and this almost lamentation that he never taught him how to shave. And so I'm always asking students, when they either don't know what's going on or they're looking to grab onto something, look for the yin and the yang. What are some opposites? Or look for the shift. Find something where you think there's a shift. We spend all that time talking about shift words and shift phrases and other things. And then what's happening before it, what's happening after. And I really saw that then as kind of the shift. But then that personality or the perspective of the speaker on the father, I totally was not prepared for line 17.
Yeah.
Even though when I read it aloud just now, I saw it could be read a different way than I'd initially read it. And that's the beauty of the poem. So I don't know where to go with these things. These are things, and this is the difficulty with poetry and the difficulty with literature. And it's great to illustrate this with students too. So go ahead, Tim.
Right. And what I really liked about this, right, is because I feel like, when he says how quietly my father's life passed us by, it's almost like this almost fond remembrance. And when I got to this picture of him remembering those mornings, like with him masquerading with the foam on his cheeks and whatnot, I remember when my dad used to do that. And I was really thinking that this was going to be, a remarkably positive poem. I'm thinking about these kind of ways that, the roses discreetly take the water from the vase. Why? For life, right? How the clouds form, all these things. And then you're right with that word then. It says, as if it was his beard I took the blade to. And all of a sudden we see this kind of like almost like chopping off, like a removing. And when you got to this line 17, there was this tension here, that face that never taught me how to shave. And I was like, oh my word, this guy, there's some sort of tension here with the relationship that he had with his father to some extent. And, so it's almost like this fond reflection that's in tension with this, hey, but he never taught me how to shave. He never, those moments of the childhood that you fondly reflect on, but you're like, but wait a second, in my adulthood, he didn't prepare me for that part. And so you see that going up here. But then all of a sudden, this next part where it talks about his legacy grows like black seeds sown over my cheeks. So we also know that his father is still just such an intricate part of his identity. So we've got these awesome complexities here that if we really take the time to look at that, it can be really nicely drawn out. So we've got this subtlety of life moving on, and then he's recognizing that he's a picture of his own father moving on in life, but he's not actually his father because there's some tension there as it comes to fruition.
Yeah, I'm glad you pointed out that what it's really important to notice is a sentence by itself, those last two lines of what that second stanza, lines 18 and 19.
I'll highlight them in a second here. Yeah.
Yeah, just like the first stanza where it ends in a sentence that is two lines that are not end stopped, which is, students should recognize, hey, that's a complete thought. You know, though both lines are independent, there's also this complete thought there. His legacy of whiskers that grow like black seeds, sown over my cheek and chin, my own flesh. The pronouns there blow my mind.
You know,
and,
I mean,
and the phrase "my own flesh," like my is it? I could see my as the speaker, my as his father.
Yeah.
And yeah, I know I'm overthinking it, but I'm in a room full of English teachers, so
so we
that's
get it,
allowed.
Right. And, you know, I mean, think about this. That's how we even describe our own children. You're of my own flesh, right? And one of these things about these enjambed lines at the end, which I didn't even consider before, is look at lines 10 and 11, where it says, I think of these slow and silent forces and how quietly my father's life passed us by. But notice the even paradoxical nature of that. Because the enjambed line is to speed up. I mean, that's what enjambment does. It speeds up the reading, but he's reflecting on that subtlety of how slowly it seemed that this happened, but now it's actually like, oh my word, like this is just a flutter. And obviously we have that kind of existential moment echoed in the third stanza as well. We had a comment in the chat here, which is just the nature of the third stanza. In the first stanza, starting with the I'm not shaving, and the second stanza is I am shaving, to kind of create that balance of what's going on in this moment right now.
Right. And so Lynn, I love it. And Lynn, what you got me thinking about here too is something that struck me a little bit, is that how he comes back to in line 20, I am not shaving. But I will tell you, and here's the Cormac McCarthy bit. If you all know Cormac McCarthy and especially The Road, which I consider a masterpiece, especially a masterpiece of minimalist prose. But in the initial poem, at the very beginning, he's got that I am not shaving, I'm writing about it. It's that contraction between the I am not shaving and then the I'm writing about it. I know that there's just something about combining that to be verb with the I, whereas in the previous statement it's separate. And we could spin that out. We could have some fun with that. You know, there is scholarship on these sorts of things. But then when I look at the contractions that are in the rest of the poem, there are so few. There's only one other one. And we get the don't in line 23. I really think, let's see, 21, 22. Yeah, that's actually 22 because 20 carries over. And so I don't know what completely to do with that, but there's something there. You know, he has this consistent, I am not shaving, but I will tell you, I'm writing about it. It's almost like he's saying, I am the writing about it. And that brings me back to this my own flesh bit.
Right. And
he is this thing. Go ahead.
And it's just that consistent image of the cutting off, right? I mean, think about this. As we're living our life, we're actually like shaving off those years, you know, as we watch that cycle, you know, and you know, we sometimes miss those little parts, and we've got two parts in here in those contractions with those little parts as well. Dries was mentioning the words like conjure and discreet and mystery and masquerade. And you know what? I think that's really nice, this idea of the mystery and the masquerade, because there's something so enigmatic about this. I'm going to share my reflection that I had after I read stanza 2, because like I said, I tell my kids to always say, bring out some sort of the complexity from the prompt. So when they have that question in mind, as they read, knock it there. So my stanza 2 complexity was this, right? I said that in stanza 2, the speaker would showcase that though the speaker may have held a potentially strained relationship with his father in some way, he recognizes the figure's consistent influences on his identity. So he starts to see that there is something of his father in him, but there may have been some strain there. And I think that we flushed that out too. But this is tied to the shaving of itself. And interestingly enough, like no matter how often you shave, it always grows back. And I wonder if there was any moment of tension where he's like, oh my word, I don't necessarily want to always be identified with my dad. And then sure enough, it's those seeds of those whiskers grow over his own cheeks, right? It just is. It's just part of who he is. It's part of his identity, and he recognizes it.
Well, and part of his identity, but it also dead pieces of self.
Yeah.
That is just, you've been calling this existential moment that it's a slap in the face, the shaven face, which, hurts much more.
Right.
But with that, I think Lynn has a really good question over here that I'd like to address. And sadly, we're going to have to move on if we want to get to all three prompts here.
We will.
But Lynn, I immediately thought about, with this poem, even before I'd gotten halfway through the first stanza, about the performative act of shaving, like performative maleness. Gender, Tim will tell you, gender and race or my graduate, graduate school work, thesis work, dissertation work. And I thought about that immediately. I didn't want to go there because that's, if I go there real quickly, kids are like, whoa, how'd you get, hold on. Yeah. I can't get there. So I'm very careful with that. But since you bring it up, I immediately thought about that. And I also thought about, being the father of sons, and Tim is the father of sons, that, that moment that they shave or they mirror shaving or something, and how they're doing that purely as an act of performative masculinity. And I don't know what to do with it completely, but I do think it's there. And it probably does have something to do with the relationship between the speaker and the father and things. Tim, you and I have not talked about it. What comes to mind? Anything?
No, I didn't even consider, I never once considered the male act of that. And the reason why is you all have to understand, so I teach AP Lit and my kids do well, and I do love literature, right? But for me, I'm like, let me get that prompt so that I can know exactly what I need to focus on, right? And so that keeps me, as I read any poem, that's what I typically do. So I wish I could offer something to that discussion, but I've got nothing, and I'm happy to
that's
admit
fine.
it.
That's totally fine. I mean, I recognize that there may be something there, but I don't really know where to go with it either.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So I see Lynn making a great comment here about the female students struggling to relate to that, and I could see that. I really could. I guess, and one of you can tell me, I've never thought about the act of a woman shaving her legs or armpits as an act of performative femininity. I would assume it would be, but I don't know. I don't have daughters. And I had my sister who was much younger than me. So I'd love to see some comments in the chat on that. I think I could learn from that.
Yeah. I want to actually comment on something else that came up in the chat while that discussion happens too. It's brought up the idea of the silent and the silently and the silent and the quietly in the first stanza, but it doesn't show up throughout the rest anymore. And one of the things that really stuck out to me in this first stanza too was in the middle of all that silence, you have all of these soft S sounds with the consonants, the assonants, and whatnot. So we've got the ocean and the stream and the rising and the clouds and the spider webs and the discrete, and you get the point. All the S's and the soft sounds there. And one of the things that I appreciate about that form is it doesn't show back up necessarily. Well, I guess it does with the spider spins and the range transforms. But, we have something that's much more less subtle in this last stanza. And so I think there's a stark contrast there with all of this kind of calming and subtleness in the first stanza. And then in the last stanza, I mean, he looks up in the mirror, recognizes that there's a reflection that's a continuous reflection consistently, and has this existential moment and is like, oh my gosh. And I think that's one of those reasons why you don't necessarily see all that kind of softness anymore, because this is not a soft thing to discuss or a soft thing to deal with. And as he considers shaving, he's considering what it's like to be cut off. I mean, that is pretty consistent. And I think that's the moment that we often get to in our lives. I mean, we all have this kind of moment where it's like, oh my word. And someday we are, we're done. The steam on the edge of the mirror. Right. But interestingly enough, I think the irony here, though, is that he ends with the words "without a trace," and yet, as he reflects on his father and his own growth of whiskers, those are the traces that he describes of his father. So he's like, "Without a trace, we're gone." But really, that's not necessarily so. We see the complexity there because Dad's right there in his whiskers, and he recognizes it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh, and look at that, right? And then we have the comment down here that the steam is still part of the water cycle. Absolutely. I didn't even consider that part of it at the very end, connecting it to the idea of moving on, especially because that's the trace that's going to come back with the water that comes out of the faucet that flushes it down the drain. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Right?
And that's that. I mean, and that's the steam, the same steam that we see in line 4 with the ocean steam rising.
Yeah.
You know, we're thinking, in the clouds. So, okay. So I got one more thing, Tim, that I've noticed and I think was really interesting to me. And I haven't thought much about it. I've just noticed it. What do you make of the 2 rhyming lines, 25 and 26? When perhaps the roses drink and the clouds form, when perhaps the spider spins and the rain transforms. And they're not even rhyming. It's you could just say it's a repetition of the word and the sound. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah. So for me, as I look at this last stanza, I'm thinking about this guy who's wrestling with his, in part, with his father's influence on his own life and him becoming himself, and he's looking at himself in the mirror, so it's his own identity. And for me, right, he's formed by his past, but he transforms into his own self. And for me, that's the kind of thing I was thinking of as he's coming to this point where he's recognizing, like, okay, this is who I am, and this is where I am in life, and sometimes I have this moment. But that's the only thing that I associated with that with as I read. But that would have been how I would have written about it.
Yeah, and I was going on the very literal ideas of something forming, something transforming, something being created.
Yep.
But then something changing, and I couldn't help but think about line 8 where he talks about becoming a river, the fresh fall of rain becoming a river.
Oh, yep.
And then talking about the italicized am in line 12, when I am shading, this idea of nothing is, everything is becoming, everything is changing constantly. So lots of great fun there. So, and I really like what Doris says here in the chat. She brought up the water cycle, about how he sets it up again in the first, and my thoughts with that, seeing both of those, the steam, the clouds, the rain in that last stanza, just like in the first stanza, I was thinking the poem's coming full circle, just like water comes full circle, that cycle. And in a way, life comes full circle, like what Tim was saying about, him and his father and things. So, you all are just wonderful. I love seeing this. So,
Brandon, I'm just going to share one more thing. One more thing here, right? So whenever I have kids read poetry and write about poetry, like I said, I have to get them to write about it, and I want them to get to write about it meaningfully. So I give them these sentence stems where I tell them, look, you got to find a literary element, and then I make them say suggesting that. And then the next topic sentence has to say showcasing that. And then my last sentence is actually revealing that. And this is where we try to get to that kind of thematic development. And, I know that on the AP Lit exam, 3 movements is typically kind of how I want my kids to do it, only because they only have 40 minutes to write the essay. So if you're teaching this, I just wanted to give someone, just some tips. If you're trying to get kids to really think about, really think about the poem, if you give them these little stems, this really helps a lot, especially with this last revealing that. And so when I got to the end, I just said, revealing that the mundane moments of life, like shaving or like when think about the water cycle, like you never think about those things. And I can expose the internal existential crises that all must come to face. And we know that all must come to face it because he's in the mirror in that last scene. And what's he actually doing? He is literally facing his own self, right? And so just having little stems like that is a great way to teach kids to make it through poems. And, you can add stems if you use a longer poem like Proof Rock. You can give kids stems. You can give kids like 9 stems based on however many shifts you want to pick up and stuff like that. But for teachers that are looking for some, I guess, like not just kind of geeky stuff that we're doing, but actual teaching application, that's one of the things that's been really, really helpful in getting my kids to be able to navigate through poetry, because they know, all right, the complexity of the actual act, suggesting that, highlighting that or showcasing that, and then revealing that. And that typically is what gets them to be to be mostly comfortable.
That's awesome, Tim. Thank you for taking the time to walk us through and show us that, because it so many students who don't know how to start grabbing onto their ideas.
Yeah,
like they've got this idea, but they don't know how to articulate it or how to grab it, get it on paper. You've just done it for us. So fantastic. Yeah. Thank you so much. So when we think about question 2, this is a hard shift, bad segue. Sorry, y'all.
I know, right?
I could do for a mini lesson on transitions here, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But we want to take some time to talk about Linda Hogan's excerpt here, The People of the Whale. I'll read the prompt, but we're not going to take the time to read the whole passage. If you want to take some time to familiarize yourself with it as we go, that's fine. And please feel free to drop any ideas you have in the chat. Anything that you think we missed or that you think we should add to, drop it in there. We're here to learn from you guys too. So I'll go ahead and share that. I'm sorry, I'll go ahead and read that. You got it shared, Tim.
Yep.
The following excerpt is from Linda Hogan's novel, People of the Whale, published in 2008. In this passage, the narrator describes 2 events that occur in a community: an infant's birth, shortly followed by an octopus's walking out of the sea.
I love that. I really just love that. I'm sorry for laughing, Brandon, but I'm just
No, you're fine. No, this podcast I listen to all the time does this thing called "Okay, Stop." Well, they'll play quotes, and then somebody who's leading will say, "Okay, stop." So let's just "Okay, stop." Can you imagine your kids' faces? I'm just going to pause for a moment, and I want everyone to close their eyes and think of that kid in their class who made that face.
Yeah.
Because I know the face I made when I read it.
Right. Like, what the garbage?
And I was, and I'll be, full transparency. Like, these are prompts I had never seen. The past couple of years of prompts were things that before I left College Board, I had seen a lot of them. This year's prompts, I've never seen any of them. And so I was shocked by, like, whoa, what a cool passage.
Yeah.
Or, whoa, octopus. I can't wait to see the memes on this one. So it's great. So let me keep reading here.
Hold on 1 second. I actually had a kid who told me, he's like, Freitas, I know we can't talk about it. When they're released, we'll talk about it. He's like, but question 2, he was like, he said it was so entertaining. So entertaining. And I said, okay, well, we'll talk about it on Friday. But anyway,
I saw where somebody on the AP Literature Facebook group, their students, someone of their students had brought in a stuffed octopus, and they were making sacrifices to it, like dropping quarters or candy or pencils in the jar and things like that.
I am doing that tomorrow in my classroom. They're going to walk in and put something in front of my stuffed octopus. That is a great idea.
You've got to do it. Make sure I want to see pictures.
I will
send us pictures.
Oh, I'll see him on Friday, so we'll post it. Absolutely.
So Marcia over here says that one kid dropped his pen. No doubt. No, I mean, that's those faces stuck around and voiced plenty of opinions on this. I'm sure they did, Dono. I'd love to hear him. So let me finish. Read the passage carefully. Then, in a well-written essay, analyze how the author uses literary elements and techniques to develop a complex characterization of the community. Now, I want to first thing say, we didn't talk about it with the poetry question, but as a person who writes a lot of prompts, reads a lot of essays, gives a lot of feedback to the teachers I coach and things on prompts, the first thing I see in this prompt, and this is not me saying College Board did the wrong thing. I do not think they did. Okay. This prompt is written exactly the way I think it needs to be written for this passage. Okay. Because the focus is the community. However, I can't wait to see the essays where the students write about how the octopus is characterized. Because it's going to happen.
Yeah. And Brandon, that actually brings me to the same thing that I do with this type of prompt that I do with the poetry prompt. And that is, I always make my kids go to the to develop, and I say, what can't you know? And make sure that you really write out this question, because what can't you know? I need to be able to identify the community, and I need to be able to identify how that community is characterized. And because that word community is right there in the prompt, my kids are going to write that question at the top of it and know I might even see like alliteration in here, but if that alliteration does nothing with the community, I better not even touch that. Right.
Yeah.
And so really developing that question from the prompt is such a game changer, I think, to get kids to help kids access what they have to do on test day. And so my kids came back and then we looked at the prompt the other day, and I was like, look at what's our question. And they're like, the community, Freitas. And I'm like, boom, thank you. Because I think that sometimes they would have been drawn to characterize the mom. the mom who goes like waving her child every day in front of the octopus. And it's like, no, we got to think about the community as a whole. And that actually makes reading it a little easier, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But anyway,
no, I'm glad you said that, because it makes me think of something, and what it goes right along with what Lynn says over here in the chat, that characterization of community is the challenge. And I completely agree, Lynn. What I try to remind my students is they need to focus on complexity.
Yeah.
And where they can see the complexity. And so I said a moment ago that I think College Board did the exact right thing here in writing the prompt this way, because the only thing that really has complexity is the community. Now, I could see somebody arguing that the octopus has a complex, sure, but with enough evidence in the passage, it's going to be the community. And so again, I look for that yin yang. And so, Tim, if I can share something real quickly.
Yeah, on the screen itself, or
please, yes, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
And you go ahead and make your comment while I share.
Yeah. So I hope you have access to share that.
I do. I do.
My comment is going to be this, though: if the kids actually talk about the complexity of the associations with the octopus, which I think some kids might actually do, it'll actually reflect back on the community, though, because some of the community members are like really practical about it. Other community members are like fearful of it. Other community members are like, hey, this has to be like a positive omen, right? And so if they look at how the octopus is kind of like addressed throughout, there is a chance that could still bring them back to commenting on the community, because I think that's kind of where kids might be driven towards. So at least if they're talking about the complexity of the octopus, right, and how it's viewed by the community, we're going to be able to tie it to the community, and that's one of those things that will still be rewarded.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, absolutely. It's still going to be rewarded. I'm so glad you said that, Tim, because it does come back to the community. And ultimately that's the way that the complexity is the way the octopus is viewed by the community, like you said. And, we are not, Tim and I are both experienced readers.
Yeah.
But we are not planning the reading for this year. I'm not an advanced table leader. Tim is doing language this year. But so what I'm going to say, we don't know, but when Tim says they'll probably still get credit, we want you to know, many of you already know, the readers at the reading or digitally also are asked to give the students the benefit of the doubt. Yeah. So where the students are identifying complexity, where they're able to look at that characterization and ground it in the text, they're going to get more credit. So the readers will do their best to give it to them. Now, Tim knows, and a lot of you know, that in your classroom, I say you want to hold some of that credit back because you want to have a little, I don't want to say a higher standard, but you want to push them a little bit. But with what Tim just said.
Hey, Brandon, after you talk about this, if you're willing to share that in the chat, that was asked. So if you're willing to share the document in the chat, feel free to do so.
So this is part of a huge binder document. But if you all want to take screenshots, please go ahead. Just, I try to give credit to everyone who I steal stuff from. So please give me credit.
That binder document is given out at the Garden of English Summer Workshops, right?
This is not that binder document.
Oh, bummer. All right.
Sorry. So this is a very large document. You can see it's about 500 pages, but you feel free to take screenshots. Just, please give credit where credit's due, and I'll give credit to you. But I always ask students to think about things in the romantic or realistic point of view. And here you see often in text, literary text, it comes down to individual versus society. Well, we see that here. I think we pretty clearly see that here. That in a way it becomes the mother against the society, but not the whole society, against the part of the society that's not accepting of this first. We slowly see it change. But this is a way to get students started. And yes, I recognize it's binary and things, but it's a way to get kids started. And if you start doing this in August or you start doing it earlier in high school, then they get used to starting to look for that, but then looking for the nuance with it. And so I really do see people who would say the romantics and the realist, even if I look at the passage, and it has the part where line 26, where the fishermen say it's only practical. Right. And so I see that practical versus the creative, the emotional, and so on. So I wanted to share this. as a way to get kids started when there's a huge passage. Said, okay, where's the yin, where's the yang, and how can you talk about where they meet? Okay.
All right. I'm gonna sharing there. Yep. Okay. I'll go back to the prompt itself.
Thank you.
And the reading. But yeah, Brandon, getting a screenshot of that is going to be money, because I'm like, because now I'm thinking about creating universal insight statements or thematic statements where where I can force the kids to include both the idealistic and the realistic in terms of creating that universal element there. So
Tim, I want you to say more about that, because this is something that you do, and that a lot of really effective teachers do, that a lot of literature teachers are afraid to do. You said force kids.
Yep.
Okay.
And all the time.
I hear a lot of people say, well, I want it to be organic and I want my kids to come up with their own ideas. But I don't think you're saying that's them coming up with their own ideas isn't exclusive of you forcing them to do these things. So can you say a little more?
Yeah. So what I do in my classroom is I make my kids produce thematic statements, but before I do, I make them generate ideas. So I'll say, look, when we read something, I want you to identify singular abstractions that each part relates to, right? So let's actually just look at this one where it says, hey, it's only practical, right? Or when the octopus walked out on the sea, nobody expected it. So my kids might write enigmatic here. They might write pragmatic here, or practical, or something like that. And as they create all these ideas, we'll line them all up, and I'll say, good, here's your template. And that it'll be Linda Hogan writes People of the Whale in order to illustrate that. And then I make them combine a statement of those, just those ideas. So they'll say, in order to illustrate that, pragmatism. And then I'll say, good, finish that up. What do I learn about pragmatism, about the community in relation to this for a universal kind of application? But what I'm thinking about in relation to the paper that you just showed is if we can actually take all those ideas and put them in the romantic side and the realistic side, and then say, all right, kids, well, I want you to try to write these statements where you have to have a romantic idea and a realistic idea, and see if we can't get a universal insight here from reading this particular piece.
Yeah, and those romantic and realistic ideas are always ideas. They are abstractions. And if you've got the romantic and the realistic, you've got the conflict, you've got the tension, and you're going to get that complexity.
Right.
All right. And so whether it's the kid who struggles, who getting a 2 on the exam is going to be like a freaking gold medal, or it's the kid who, is on the borderline between the 4 and the 5, and they really need something to start with before they can get to that super complexity, it's great to have them start with something like that.
Right. And you know what's really cool about that too is that you can give the kids a really easy stem to do this, right? So we could help them focus on, hey, this has to be about the community. So you got to make a statement about the community that has ideas in it. But you could say, hey, she writes this in order to illustrate that. And then you tell them that although, make them put the word although right there. And that will say that although, boom, insert the romantic side of this, and then comma, finish it with the clause that's the realistic and the practical.
Yeah.
And you're going to see how that fits with the community. Brandon, you want to address that? You want to address that comment in the chat there?
Yeah, I think it's great that you said what you said before we addressed the comment from Mrs. here. Miss, that's her rock star name, just Mrs. I like that. But we have look at the abstract ideas that are in conflict here.
Yeah.
Whether she meant to do it or not, we have fear, we have peace, we have disruption, we have community, we have reverence. Okay, we have omnipotence, we have connection. I mean, not all of those are in conflict with one another, but I certainly see enough there to talk about it. And what she's done here is she's illustrated that a lot of us do these things as English-minded people. We do these things because we've either had really good teachers or we've always had a mind for them or somewhere along the way, a mixture of both. But what Tim and I really talk a lot about is finding ways to make this stuff accessible for students who may not be that of that mind. And some people call it formula. Some people call it, tricks or whatever. It's just giving kids a way to shape and to begin to form the complexities of ideas we'd like them to get to. I haven't read Hannah's yet here. Go ahead, Tim.
So I read Hannah's, and I have to admit, right? So when the prompts come out, when the test is done, I actually scour Twitter. Now, I don't talk about the prompts with my kids because they sign something, and I'm like, look, you put your name on that. That is your word. So we don't do that. I'm like, but I'm going to go scour Twitter myself and see if I can figure out what's going on. And I actually saw one meme that was like, this kid just said, never in a million years did I ever think that I would associate an octopus with Christ, right? Now, if you all don't know this, I teach theology, and I'm obsessed with it. And I read this piece, and I'm like, I got nothing. I've got nothing to relate to that meme. And I really tried. But, Hannah, you just clarified it for me, okay? I could totally see the interpretive measure of that. So you tell that student that I'm like, oh, finally, thank you for clarifying a meme that I could not get my head around for the last 3 days. As I considered such. But anyway.
So I'd like to, before we move on,
yep.
One of the things that I did as I was thinking about this was I started thinking, what things do I see in conflict here? What are some of the yins and yangs I see here? Immediately I see children and adults.
Yep.
From the beginning, but all the way throughout. I see that. I see humans and nature. I see that in the prompt.
Oh, yeah.
Honestly. I see male, female. I especially love the line that I think is the shift, the most significant shift in this passage. Scroll back down there for me, Tim.
Yep.
It is, but one of the powerful women stepped up. And I loved that play between power and gender, especially talking about it in the previous line just right above it. It's the fishermen who were trying to be practical. Like, let's just do it. And they spent days talking about it. But it's clear they don't have power because she's the one with power there. And I loved it. And I don't think College Board intended to create a male-female binary from the poem to the prose here. I know that's not how they do it, but they've done it.
Yeah, there you
exactly
go. Right?
What has happened here. But I'm going to be really selfish for just a second.
Yep.
And I would like to know, Tim, and anyone else here in the chats, we think about shift phrases and what they tell us. Line 65, for the time it dwelt there. That brought just that to the comma, for the time it dwelt there, comma, told me so much before I got to the end of that sentence. They brought offerings even for the first flowers of the morning. Get that? But that transition phrase, for the time it dwelt there.
Yeah, I'll highlight that. Yeah.
That seems really packed to me. What do you think? Am I overthinking it?
It didn't even cross my mind. However, let me explain why. Because as you know, I look at these prompts and I'm like, how am I going to get my kids to make realizations? I give them their stems. Yeah. So the entire time I'm thinking about the community, right? And how the community is responding to it. So I just glanced right over this. So I'm interested to hear why you are amped up about it or jazzed up about it, I guess.
Well, that was like, it's like a political debate. You just completely avoided the question and kicked it back to me. No, it's fine. Totally fine. So there's something about for the time, that phrase, knowing that it's going to end. Like, it's not always going to be there. Okay. For the time and then it dwelt there. It dwelt, like the past tense of that. So we know, even though it doesn't happen in this passage, we know it's finite. We know it's going to end. And that mattered to me. Even when I get to the end of the passage where College Board has to cut off about how the mother, dressed in white, there's your Christian imagery again, took the baby Thomas daily across the sand of the cave when the tide was out. So, but we know, like I'm left, is that forever? Is that, it must not be, because eventually this is going to end, right? So that's why I thought it was so loaded, especially as I continued through the rest of the passage.
Yeah. And, I asked my students like what they did here, and as they focused on the community, and they said that they wrote through the paper. They were like, look, you've got this part of the community, You've got these people who are afraid of it. You've got some people who just assign meaning to things. And then you have those that when they can't understand something, they end up actually worshiping it. And they're like, this is, the functions of society. This is how we break up society in and of itself. And so they wrote through that. But one of the things that I loved about this particular passage was this line that I highlighted, right, where it says, it sensed their emotions and formed itself to fit beneath a ledge. And then it says it could shape itself into anything, a bottle, a basket. And what I was looking at here was, it says, but if it kept an eye on how it didn't, right? What I loved about this here, though, was in relation to society, like in order to continue to endure, right, society has to change. And this octopus is almost like a picture of that, right? In the midst of all of what happens, it has to actually be form and fit to the current times. And when I looked at the octopus there, I'm like, oh my word, this octopus is the community that's worshiping it to a sense, being able to kind of form and fit to what it needs to be. And these different people needed it to be different things and different images. And I mentioned that to my students and they were like, yeah, we didn't write about that. Did we get it wrong? And I was like, whoa. No reason to go there. I'm like, This is just an association that I brought up with the octopus here.
Yeah. And I love that even with the sentence that at the bottom of that column, yet that quality scared people who knew little about them. But had heard so much about shapeshifters, et cetera. And it takes me back to what someone had written above. Mrs. had written about the fear.
Right.
Again. Yeah, I think it's great.
And actually that is mentioned by Victoria here too, where her students saw the significance of the old people and the traditions and the newborn and the change, and the octopus as being the symbol of the fear of that change. And notice how even up top, right, with the cave itself, it says the boys smoked cigarettes in there and the young people went and made love in the cave. So the ones that aren't afraid of it are those that are more well, I should say the ones that aren't afraid of the cave itself are the ones that are more youthful anyway. So now all of a sudden we've got this kind of old man in the sea type of vibe coming in here. Like what is the change, and do we stick with the old way or the new or the and we've got that going on. I love this passage. I'm like, I want to read the book. The problem is, was the last time I read a book based on a passage on the AP Lit exam, it was We Were the Mulvaneys, and the Mulvaneys passage is my most favorite passage ever. I read the book and I hated it. I absolutely hated that book. And I'm like, oh man, I don't want to ruin this passage for me again. But I'm glad that AP Lit finally has a flamingo. This is AP Lit's flamingo, and I'm so jazzed up about it.
It is.
Yeah.
Was it you? I said that too. I think I said that to somebody.
Was it me? Maybe.
I can't remember. But I had the same thought. I was like, okay, yeah, this is what they've done. They've created their mascot for AP Lit. I agree. So great. So hey, there's some great comments here in the chat, but I know we told you all we wouldn't keep you past 9 o'clock much. So let's go ahead and kind of talk here. There's so many things to do here with this prompt. Tim, would you mind reading it?
Yeah, I'm going to read the prompt. Before we do, just because we're at the end of our time here, Brandon, though, I am going to give everybody a plug. Just so you know, Brandon does lead the AP Lit Garden of English summer sessions, where you get free stuff from AMSCO. We have a bunch of sponsors this year and people that we team up with for a lot of discounts, too. Colin McCann is providing some work for us, so the National Book Award winner for that. And I think Sarah Zerwin is also tuning in for AP Lit and stuff there, too. I'll put a chat to where you can actually check that out if you want to. This is free, though, so I want everybody to realize, like, hey, this is free. That's why I also saved that full mention to the very end. It wasn't the first thing that I said, so people aren't like, what a scumbag. He ropes us in to talk about geeky things because he's an English teacher and then, does that. But please note, Brandon covers all of our AP Lit stuff for the Garden of English, and I'm super grateful for him as we have really awesome opportunities this year, so you can check those out. But let me read the prompt now. Here we go. Many works of literature feature characters who accept or reject hierarchical structure. This hierarchy may be social, economic, political, or familial, or it may apply some other kind of structure. Either from your own reading or from the list below, choose a work of fiction in which a character responds to a hierarchy in some significant way. Then, in a well-written essay, analyze how the character's response to the hierarchy contributes to an interpretation of the work as a whole. Do not merely summarize plot. All right, Brandon, what are you thinking?
So I can't quit thinking about a tweet that I saw where a teacher was concerned about his students knowing the words hierarchy, familial, things like that. And I understand that. I feel that. I think that they could feel better, though, knowing that if you skip that first intro and just look at the second part, either from your own reading, choose a work or fiction in which a character responds to a hierarchy in some significant way. You think, well, if they don't know the word hierarchy, what are they going to do there? Okay. And expect the character's response to the hierarchy contributes to the interpretation of the work as a whole. If they don't know the word hierarchy, they're hurting there. I agree.
Yeah.
But if they don't talk about a specific political, familial, economic, or social hierarchy, they're still going to be okay. All right. They do have to talk about some sort of relationship to hierarchy. If that becomes a relationship to power, then they're essentially talking about a hierarchy.
Yeah.
Too. So
right, and I think that the words social and economic and political and political are things that kids can kind of work in. But I do agree. Having that contextualization for hierarchy might have been a little bit more, I guess, equitable, for the lack of a better term.
I think so too.
In that stance. Now, interestingly enough, Brandon, I want to just talk to you about some of the things that my kids did that just kind of wowed me. So you'll have to understand, part of my AP Lit, we read Alice in Wonderland because it's my most favorite book ever anyway. My kids came back and they were like, we wrote about Alice. And I'm like, okay. And I was like, let's talk about that. And Frankenstein, and I'm getting these ones in here, Hamlet and the Poisonwood Bible and the Awakening and whatnot. But when you get a prompt like this, what are you going to do? What are you going to do for kids to tell them, how do you plan out your essay for something like this? Because, we get this word hierarchy. We see the types of hierarchy that there are. If they don't know what hierarchy means, they can at least think about social, like society, economic, political, and they can probably get a hint of it. Mm-hmm. But what are they going to do to approach it?
Yeah. So as a language teacher too, Tim, I know you're going to be right with this. And those of you that are on the call, if you do language as well, you're going to be right with it. This is an argument. Yeah. This is a literary argument. And you already have your big idea. You already have your universal idea here to talk about. You're talking about power, essentially. It could be a hierarchy, but a hierarchy is a manifestation, a system of power. Now, you may not talk about it like that with your kids, but it's power. And so you're going to pick a text that says something about power, and you're going to pick instances from that text that support what you're saying about power. And that's what I encourage my students to do, to draw moments from the text. And so when we're reading texts, I have something I call moments sheets that I've shared before, and I could share again. It's all about capturing certain moments in the text. But I'm always asking students to think, okay, what idea does each of these moments relate to? So they start thinking about moments, not as just things that happen, but things that happen in relation to some abstract idea in the text too. And so just the way you approach teaching argument, and in the argument class, in the language class, in the language and composition class, you're also going to approach it this way. Except here, the instances aren't going to be from the students' experiences or knowledge or study. It's going to come from students' reading of a particular text.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And I love some of the texts that people are dropping in here. Yeah, there's so many of these texts because almost every text, any text I can think of, has a conflict in it, and conflict is usually power, and there's a hierarchical system at play there.
I have to tell you, right? I tell my students that they can write about anything, and the reason why is because when I got my teaching license for my essay, I wrote about Alice in Wonderland on my essay. So that's why I'm like, look, if you read Peter Pan or Alice in Wonderland, you can write about that book on your AP Lit because those are delightfully layered and complex books, right? And I tell my kids, I'll let you write about The Giver. I'll let you write about anything that's considered, even if it's YA, as long as you know it's complex. But I tell them the two books I will not let you write about, or that I hope you never write about, are Twilight and The Hunger Games. I'm like, please just no. And sure enough, my kids came back and they were like, when we got the prompts, they were like, we didn't do it, but all we're going to say is that we could have written killer essays about the Hunger Games for this. And I looked at the prompt and I was like, you're right. You're absolutely right. You could have. But I don't, I'm just like, thank you for not, but you could have.
Yeah. So something I've dropped in here is, this is a rudimentary one, And then I also have a larger one that I've created. I don't mind if you all contact me. Really, I don't, because I know we want to wrap up the evening. But you can contact me. There's my email in the chat. And I'd love, maybe next time, Tim, we need to schedule a little bit more time for this. But this has been great. I'm going to take a moment and do a shameless plug myself. I've got a new thing coming out. It is free, but you can go and check out this YouTube. We have Scholar Talks is what we're calling this. And this is a monthly kind of rollout of discussions with English professors who are scholars and experts in certain texts. And they're saying, hey, we think this book would be a great one for English teachers to teach, and why. And it's a long form, hour-long conversation. It's meant to be like a vodcast, if you would, not a really high production level because it's relaxed and we're doing it on Zoom and we're taking it easy. And then another thing, shameless plug for Tim and I, is some of you are familiar with the books that Tim and I worked on together. I invited Tim and Lauren Peterson to be my partners in working on the language book for Perfection Learning. And then I worked with another colleague of ours, Rebecca McFarland, on the AP Literature version of that. And so feel free to check them out. But we don't want you to feel like we're plugging this just because we did this. That's why we saved it for the end here. So Thank you all so much for doing this. This was a lot of fun. I learned a lot of things from you all, and so I look forward to looking back through the chat. And I think we're going to do this again next week for language. Is that right, Tim?
Yes, we are. So the only thing that I'm waiting for is to create an image where I can take the prompts and do exactly what I did with this one, kind of create that image where it's like, hey, let's talk about these three things. So once I get those prompts, we'll get that image, we'll get that out there. We really appreciate all of you. If you want to hang out with Brandon this summer, make sure you sign up to hang out with him and whatnot. We appreciate Lit. We love to help you do what you do with your kids. And we appreciate all of your time. Brandon, I appreciate you. We can be in touch by the end of the week. And we'll get together next week to do this with Lang.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Awesome.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you all. You have a great one.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Bye.